Hello and welcome back to Masterwire Jewelry. This is an exciting day. We are starting a brand new tutorial today. Yay! I'm really excited about this one. I love the way that this one comes out. Today we're going to be looking at our braided pendant. I did want to just start kind of in the opposite order as I've done all the other modules. I wanted to start today by explaining why I like to do this one on my jig so much, and I'll talk more about the jig in a minute, but let's talk about why I like to use my jig. When I first learned this braiding technique, I made a few pieces just freehand, because where I learned it, I just learned how to do this braid freehand. And although, I mean, these don't look too terribly bad, these three pieces have been in my display case for quite some time now, and they're a lower price point than what I charge for these, just because they kind of look a little bit messy. They're fine, don't get me wrong, and they're holding the stone securely, which is the important part. But after I made a few of these, I thought, I betcha I could do a way nicer braid if I just used a jig. Now, And now I do all of my braiding on the jig, and you can just see how much more even of a braid you get, and just how much that improves the look of the whole pendant, okay? So let's just talk about the jigs for a minute. This is a wig jig. It's a name brand. These are patented. They are not cheap. When I first saw these, I was all like, I bet you I could make one of these for cheaper. And yeah, if you don't count your hours and your time, you probably can make one for cheaper. However, these holes are not going to be drilled in exactly the right place if you're drilling them by hand or even using a drill press. These pieces of wire have all been nicely finished on the ends. You know, it's not a cheap tool, but for the price of it, it's well worth it. I'm super happy I invested. I did want to talk about another brand called Thingamajig, which I have some upstairs in the shop. I thought I'd bring them in because they are a cheaper price point. However, I was super not impressed with their quality. After working with a really good brand like this, it's sometimes hard to go to a cheaper brand. So, you know, do what you can afford. You saw I just had a piece of my painter's tape over top of all my pegs. You have to really be careful not to lose these pegs. Without these pegs, this is a really expensive piece of plastic, and it's going to be basically useless to you. So make sure to keep track of these pegs. I usually just clump them all together and throw a piece of tape on them. I don't even bother with the Ziploc bag that they came with. So don't lose these pegs. That's my lesson to you. I'm going to start moving them around in preparation for my project. I need 4 staggered across the top, just like this, okay? And this is going to be what I need to start my 5-strand braid. The rest of these, I just kind of want to get them up out of the way. So you can either just put them in a small bowl, or I just like to get them kind of up out of the way where they're not going to get in the way of my tails. So let me just spend a minute and do this, knowing that these 4 are the starter ones, okay, and that they're staggered a little bit. All right, I'm almost there. You just got to get this organized. It's always good to have the right tool for the job and to take care of your tools. I'm the first person to always say that. Okay, so this is how I'm going to start. I need these 4 pegs to start with. I'm going to move these ones in as I need them. But this is my starter 4 pegs, or just those 4, okay? But we need some wire first, so how do we know how much wire to use? Well, I've decided to wrap this piece of lapis, and I'm going to bring in my measuring tape. I know, it's not a measuring tape, but I really like how just easy and accurate of a measurement this gives me every single time. All right, let's see how close that got. That's fairly close. Do I have some cutters? I do. All right. Sometimes you can just come in and do a flush cut, and there it's perfectly met ends. Get rid of that. So that's the length of wire, of course, to go all the way around my stone. A couple things with the braid. Because your wires kind of do this, as they go through the braid. You actually need just a little bit more length of your wire to get this. But because we're going to be changing the shape of our braid from flat to this kind of domed, curved edge, that actually makes our braid get a little bit longer. So you probably are a little bit confused the way I explain that. Don't worry, I will explain that again later. Basically, we're going to just use the length of our tape as our estimate, and then of course we need our tails. Today I've got my 20 gauge out. You can do this with on a smaller stone, 22, 21 gauge, on a bigger stone, 18 gauge. I find about 20 gauge is a good starting point, and from there you can judge yourself whether you want it longer or shorter. When I do these through my own experience, if you want, you can add your 6 inches on this side and your 6 inches on this side plus the length of your tape and make all 5 wires. We do need 5 wires because we're doing a 5-strand braid. You can make all 5 wires this length. Through experience, I have found that in order to do a 3-strand braid bail and have a nice long piece of wire to wrap around my neck, that's 4 long tails. Period. You don't need too much more than that. So I've got 1 long wire that gives me 2 long tails. I'm actually going to cut this one even a little bit longer so that I've got a really long tail to wrap around my neck here. So those are my 4 long tails on my very first 2 wires. Now from here, I do need to make sure I've got enough wire, but these ones need to be, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches longer, 3 or 4 inches longer than your tape. So they do need to be longer than your tape, but not by, a foot again. And so I'm going to do 3 of these. 3 of these here. Okay, so I've got my 5 wires. Before I jump in, I do want to do just a little bit of review on how to do a 5-strand braid. Maybe it's been years since you've braided and you're not even sure how to do a 3-strand braid. I've actually had people take this class with me in person, and they get there and they're like, I don't know how to braid. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's not a big deal. I will teach you. So this is my handy dandy teaching tool with my 5 strands. First, I'm going to take 2 strands away, and I'm just going to do a super quick review of a 3-strand braid for those who might be a little rusty, or maybe, never had a daughter to braid your hair. Whose hair you can braid? So, when you've got 3 strands, the first thing you need to do is separate your 3 strands into 2 groups, okay? And I'm going to put them on either side. It doesn't matter which side has 2 and which side has 1, but you will always have one side that has 1 more string than the other side. When you only have 3, that means 2 and 1 is your split, okay? So when you do a 3-strand braid, you always take the string on the very outside, on the side that you have extra on. Okay, so this side has 2, so I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to start with the top one. What I do with this one is I bring it over this one, and it becomes the inside one on the other side. Okay, so now I reassess. I've got 2 over here, so I want to start on this side. I always start with the outside one. I bring it over top of this one, and it becomes the inside one over here. Okay, do that a couple more times. Reassess. I've got 2 over here. Take the outside one over this one, and it becomes the inside one on the opposite side. This hopefully is starting to get repetitive. I've got 2 over here, take the outside over top of the other one, and it becomes the inside one on this side. And it's starting to be a braid. So outside one over top of the other one becomes the inside one on this side, outside one becomes the inside one on the opposite. And we're always going over top. Okay, so this is our 3-strand braid. It's a little loose, it's not the neatest looking braid, but that's the essentials of it. That's the anatomy of the braid, okay? So let me just undo this, and I want to show you a 5-strand braid, which is almost the same, almost. Now I've got 5 strands instead of 3. My first step is the same, where I need to actually split these into 2 groups, okay? One group, because I've got an odd number, always has 1 extra strand than the other side. So right now, this is the side with 3 strands. I always start with the outside one, except this time I'm going to go over the first one and under the second one, and then it's going to become my inside one on this side. Okay, so that looks like over this one, under this one, and then it becomes my inside one over here. Now I've got 3 on this side. So the outside one goes over and under and becomes my inside one on this side. Ta-da! My outside one over and under, and it becomes my inside one over here. I'm sorry you can't see my braid. It's a little tougher with string actually than it is with wire in some ways, because you sort of have to hold everything. Outside string, over and under, becomes the inside one on this side. All right, keep going. Outside one, over and under, becomes the inside one over here. So this is the anatomy of a 5-strand braid. If you go to 7 strands, it's the same thing. You start with the outside one, you would go over, under, there would be one more string here, and you would go over it. So over, under, over, and then it becomes the inside strand over there. I've only got 5 strands still, so it's still just over and under. But that's how you do this. And then if you have 9 strands, you'd still start with the outside. It would go over, under, weaving through the next wires, and still it'll become the inside one on this side. So that's the anatomy of a 5-strand braid. Over and under, and then it becomes the inside one on the other side. Okay? So I hope that's as clear as mud. Hopefully a little clearer. That's the anatomy of our braid. Just so that you understand it. We are ready to bring our jig back in. Remember, these are 4 starter pieces, and I've already cut my 5 wires. Let's set this up, okay? I'm gonna go back to my handy dandy painter's tape because I need some hold here. I start with my 3 short wires. I'm gonna just kind of make them so the ends are more or less lined up. Okay. Now, ignore all these outside ones. I've got my 4 pegs here and 3 wires. I'm not going to tape them all on to begin with because that's just too much. I place my 3 wires in between my 4 pegs. I hope you can see that. In between my 4 pegs, going straight up and down. I've got about 1 inch of tail sticking up here. Okay, you don't need a ton of tail, but you do need to leave yourself about 1 inch of tail. And my ends are fairly even. They don't have to be perfect. And I'm literally just going to tape these down to my jig. Ta-da! Okay, that's 3 wires started. Let's do the other 2. These kind of have a curve in them. I'm just going to use my fingers to straighten that out a little bit. These aren't even the same length. Remember, I cut one of these like significantly longer than the other. I'm going to leave my super long tails down at the bottom here. And I want to place these 2 wires just on the outside of these 4 pins. I want about my 5 or 6 inches sticking off the top, on top of this row of pegs. Okay, I want about 5 inches sticking up here. And they're just touching the outside of those 4 pegs. I'm just going to grab one more piece of tape here. There's my end. And tape these last 2 wires down. Okay, let's get them back so they're just touching the outside of my pegs. Just like that. My tails are sticking up there. I've got about 5 inches each. And I'm literally just going to tape that down. Haha, I'm ready to start. Okay, I've got my 4 pegs and my 5 wires in place. I'm ready to start. So how do I start? This, because I want a nice start here, there's a very specific step to this. So just, you know, set this up, do it with me the first couple of times. It's not super obvious, but this works. Okay, so this very edge one, I'm lifting up and then I'm reaching underneath of it to grab the next one in, and I'm going to bend it against this peg. And I'm going to bend it a very precise amount. I want this to follow in between my rows of holes. You see how those rows of holes just do this, and this happens to be sitting right in between them. That's exactly what I want. I'm going to do the same on the other side. So I reach underneath of this end one, grab the next one in, and I'm just bending it against, this time it's against this peg up here. It's the higher peg. And I want it to go in between my rows of holes. I'm going to use my rows of holes as guidelines. Now, I need to do the same with my middle one. I need to bend it one way or the other, but how do you know which way to bend it? Well, it depends on how you've set up these 4 top pegs, if you set them up just like I did, where it's high, low, then you want to press this against your lower one. So in this case, it's going to go to the left. If you did it the opposite, where it went low, high, it's going to go the other way. But either way, you want to press it against this lower peg. Okay, whichever side of this middle wire your lower peg is on, that's where you want to bend it. And I'm using the peg to make the bend. All right, so at this point, I can tell that I'm going to have 3 wires on this side and 2 on this side. These outer ones aren't bent yet. There's no point bending them out and bending them back in. This one's not touching. There we go. That's what it should be looking like at this point. Okay, and these are my outer ones, and they're on top of all the other ones. So, okay, this is the side that has 3 wires. I've left this one nicely on top, so now remember it goes on top of this first wire and underneath of this second wire. So it's already going on top of the first wire. I just need to bring it underneath of that second wire. And now, just to help my tape hold, I'm going to put my thumb up here, and I'm going to bend it against this top peg. Just like this. And again, I'm bending it so that it goes in between my holes. Something like that. All right, so now I've got 2 wires over here and I've got 3 wires over here. And this one, because I've done this before, is already set up and ready to go. It's going over top of this one and underneath of this one. And so I am ready to bend it. It's going to bend against this peg here. I want a nice sharp bend, and there, it's going in between my holes. Cool, we have started. That is some of the most confusing parts of this, is that very first starting point. From here, we need to bring in a couple more pegs. So I'm going to just take one from here, and it needs to go directly underneath of this outer one. So that means right here. And then one more from this side, and again, directly underneath of that outer one, so right there. Ta-da! There's my next 2 pegs. I've got 3 on this side, so that's the side I'm going to start with. I need to take my outer one, go over and under the next 2 wires. And now, notice how I'm getting my fingernail up as close to that peg as possible. That's going to help me get a nice sharp bend around this peg. Okay? I'm bending it so it's going in between, sorry for the shaking, in between my holes. And now this one here is kind of sticking up because it's going over top. So I'm just going to literally press this down to my pegboard, to my jig. All right, good. Now I've got 3 over here. I need to take this one over and under. One thing that I sometimes do to help me do that is this one here, this last one that went here. I need to just lift it up. So I'm holding this wire that's going on top of it down to my jig, and it's making a bend right where that wire is going over top of it. That's going to make this next step of going over and under a little bit easier. You're not going to fight against that inside wire. All right, that looks good there. It's going in between my holes. Sometimes this needs a little adjustment. Now this one, you can see it's sticking way up off of the jig. And I just need to press it down to my jig. Cool. Let's do 2 more pegs. Again, they always go down underneath of the very outside pegs. So let's take this one right here. There's my next 2 pegs. Got 3 over on this side. I'm going to start by lifting this guy up, bringing this outside one over and under, and getting as sharp of a bend as I can. If you can't get them this sharp to start with, go for consistency. Just as long as they're consistently sharp, you're doing good. Just press that one down to my jig. Now this one, I'm going to lift up. So I press this down first, and then I lift this up, if that is clear. Now, this outer one over and under. There we go. Straighten that out. This one's sticking way up, so let's press it back down. I press that one down first, and now this other inside one I can just lift up out of the way. So my outside one goes, oh wait, I'm racing ahead. I almost bent it around nothing. I didn't have a peg there. So we can add our 2 more pegs right here and right here. There, now I'm ready. I'm already going over and under. So let's just finish this. And now I need to press this wire down flat against my jig, and it actually makes like a little bit of an indent right here. You need to do that with some authority. Now I'm going to lift this one up, bring my outside one over and under. You always have to kind of brush out the end of your wires so they're not crossing. There we go. Now press this down. Press it down hard. If you need to use your pliers to do that, don't be afraid of getting your pliers in here. And now I lift this one up. Before I keep going though, I need another peg. There and there. All right, outside one over and under. There we go. And bring this back over and press it flat down to my jig. And now I need to lift this one up. Outer one over and under. Bring it around, and you see how I'm still using these holes as guidelines for the angles. And that helps me keep all of these angles consistent, row after row after row. I'm just going to keep going here because, if I bring my tape back in for a second, I need, another reason I like these is because they're clear and you can see right through them. I need more braiding than my jig allows for. So I do want to show you how to lift this up and move it so that you can continue braiding, making a longer braid than maybe your jig is long. So that's not going to be a problem. So just means you got to keep watching me for a little longer. Make sure you're getting all these steps. Sometimes I do things I don't even realize I'm doing, which is why these videos I'm hoping will be so helpful for you. All right, I'm going to lose my tape. There we go. So following my holes, bring that down, lift this one up, over and under from this side. Bring this down, lift this one up. Oh, I almost kept going. Let's go back and get some pegs. If your wig jig didn't come with this many pegs, some of them come with more, some of them come with less. That's okay too. What I strongly recommend is leaving the two top corner ones in place so this top doesn't like bounce around. But then from there, if I didn't have any more of those pegs, say maybe you lost some, maybe yours didn't come with as many, well, I'm going to take two from kind of in the middle here and move them down. And that's what I would do. And like then the next ones I would take this and this one and this one and this one. Or you can take these middle two, or you can take them right up. But I strongly recommend you leave this corner one and this corner one in place for the whole braid. And that's going to just keep this top from swinging around. It's going to keep your braid straight. And that's, you know, it's this consistency that our eyes find so appealing. And that's what's going to elevate your jewelry to the next level, is making everything super, super consistent. All right, back down to the jig, lift this guy up. Need a couple more pegs. Take them from wherever you want, except those top two corners. There we go. All right, over and under. Pressing this down, pulling this up away from my jig. Over and under. And now I don't have holes to follow, so I kind of have to imagine, you know, this line continuing from these holes. So it's not perfect, but I've got one more hole here I'm just going to use because it's there. So lift that up, over and under. There we go. Press that down. I'm out of holes. I'm out of holes and I need more braid. So I need to take off these. If you can take them off separately, it'll save you a little bit of grief. Sometimes you can save those and reuse them, but this painter's tape tends to only stick like once. So if you find it's just not sticky enough, that's okay too. So I actually lifted my braid right off of that jig, and it hasn't really changed. It's basically stayed the same. So let's just reposition. That looks really confusing. Let's reposition all of these so they're up out of the way again. You don't need the 4 and the start across the top this time. This time you really only need 2 rows on each side. And I keep about 3 here and 3 here. And that's going to be enough to stabilize our braid so we can keep going. All right. So now at this point I want to basically put my braid back onto here. Just like that. I'm going to take my piece of tape and tape that back down so that everything kind of stays in place. I'm going over this really good because I'm trying to reuse this piece of tape. Hopefully it'll be sticky enough, but we'll find out if it's not. All right, so I've got 3 on this side this time. Let me lift up this end one, this inside one. Take the outside one over and under. And push that back down. And now this inside one you got to lift up. The outside one goes over and under. And goes back down. All right, a couple more pegs. We're getting there. All right, this one can get lifted up away from my jig. This one gets pressed down. This one gets lifted up. This one goes over and under. All right, press down, lift up. A couple more pegs. All right, over and under. And lift this one up, and now the outer one goes over and under. All right, so let me bring this back in. And I want to make this about 10% shorter than my tape. And I'll explain why later. There's one step where we kind of have to squish our braid and it actually makes it a little bit longer. I will show you that step when we get there. So let's just keep going until we've got the right length. I'm gonna lift this inside one up, bring the outside one over and under. Wait, I don't have a peg there. That's gonna cause a problem. You need that peg to make the bend. That's what we bend around. There we go. Straighten that out. Press that down towards our jig. Lift this one up. Over and under. Oops. Over and under. There we go. This one comes down. This one goes up. A couple more pegs. There we go. Over and under. This one goes down. This one comes up. The outside one comes over and under. There we go. Alright, where are we at here? I need to go a little farther. I think I actually do need to go to the very bottom of my jig this time, and then that leaves me just a little bit, about 10% extra down here. And that's going to be about right. You don't need much extra, just a little bit. Alright, a couple more pegs. So this one's already kind of lifted up. This one goes over and under the next 2 strings. Press this down to your jig, lift this one up. The outer one goes over and under. This one goes down. This one gets lifted up. Well, I'm out of pegs again. That's okay, we got more. Alright. Over and under the next 2 strings. Press this down, lift this one up, over and under. Press this down, lift this up. I don't have one more hole. Nope, I'm going to stop here. I thought I had one more hole on this side, but I don't. So now, how do we make this end look like this end? Because what we want is for all of these wires to be going straight off the end of our braid, and right now they're not. They're sticking off to the side. So we kind of need to reverse engineer our starting point. And we do that by just taking 2 random pegs and putting them in that same staggered position at the very bottom of our braid. Okay, so that 1, 2, 3, there's 4 pegs, and they're kind of zigzagged and staggered from each other. From here, it's really technical. It's not at all. I'm basically just going to pull all of these wires straight, and they're going to bend around the appropriate peg. You don't even have to think about it or worry about it or anything like that. Let me get my tool out here. I just want to give them a pull. There we go. So these little kinks aren't the end of the world, but I do need to use this wire to finish my pendant. So I'm just going to take a minute and kind of make them all be fairly straight. If you want, you can even run your nylon gel pliers down them, but I think this is going to be okay. So that's it. That is my braid done. That didn't even take too super long. It's about a half-hour braiding for a stone this size. Let's get rid of our tape. I'm going to get that one out of the way so things are clear. Be careful when you lift your braid off of here. Sometimes if you've braided really tightly, your pegs can stay in these holes and then they'll come up with your braid, and if they land on the floor, sometimes they're really hard to see and find again. So do spend a minute and take care of your tools, especially if you spent a bit of money and got a nice jig like this. I am going to just put all of my pegs together so that they don't take up as much real estate. And then I bring my tape back in and I literally just tape them down. And sometimes when I'm reusing tape like this, I'll just put a couple on so that there's no risk of you losing them. And that's it. Now I know my pegs are safe. I'm not going to lose them. They're not going to get separated from my jig because they're kind of useless apart. But this is how I keep track of my pegs, and I literally just throw this in my bag with my tools. They're pretty resilient and tough, but don't lose those pegs, because without them, this is just an expensive piece of plastic and it's not going to do you much good. All right, we have made a braid. Congratulations! Now we have to make it capture our stone. All right, so I need some tools. You can use bullnose pliers for this, or you can use the back of some bent nose pliers, which I'm just looking for. There we go. There's my bent nose pliers. Let me take the sticker off of this. There's no point having that on there for later. There we go. Anyway, that's less of a big deal. That I can get off later. Okay, so this is not wholly unlike when we wrapped our weaving around the edge of our stone. We're basically going to do the same thing, where we want to take a flat braid and we want to cup the two sides up in the same direction so that it will grab the front and the back of our stone and keep it from slipping from side to side like this. Okay, you can do this with the end of your bullnose pliers. I really like doing this with the back of my bent nose pliers, and I'll show you why. It's going to help to curve this whole thing in the right direction as we do it, and that's just going to help shape our stone later. So depending on how thick your stone is, you sort of have to visualize how much wire you need to bend up on each side. So if you have a really fat stone, you're going to get like a narrower grasp. If you have a thinner stone, you got to grab a little farther in and make a wider edges and a more narrow middle. So you kind of have to imagine three, like an edge here, a middle for the side of the stone, and an edge here. And we're going to work our way down this imaginary line in our head. I'm going to do it about here. So I literally just grab on, put my finger behind, and then I literally just bend this up to the side. Okay, now I'm going to grab here, kind of in line with my last bend, and I'm just going to bend that up. And I'm going to just keep working all the way around, and you'll see how this shape changes. Don't try and do too much of this all at once. Just do like a centimeter or so at a time. And here. And here. All right. This one here. There. All right. So you can see how much that already curved this whole braid around. This is the side that I've bent up. This side I have not yet. So I was working like this before. I'm literally just turning it end for end, and I'm going to do the same thing down the other edge. Just want to grab that. All right. So here, bend this up. This second side is a little bit harder because this side is already bent up. You actually have less leverage in order to grab and fold this second side up. So do the best you can. You do want to bend these as far as you can. It does take some strength. I hope you can see what I'm doing here. All right. So I have basically cupped my braid. It kind of comes in on each side. If I bring my stone in, chances are at this point it's still going to bounce around front and back just a little bit. It's probably not super tight. This actually isn't too bad, but there is a little bit of movement front to back. And when I don't know if you can see that, when I look forward down it, it's not snug. Can you hear that? It's going back and forth a little bit. We want this cupping to fit around the edge of our stone snugly. So this next step is what is going to elongate it and squish it. I like to use my nylon jaw pliers for this. And you need some control, okay? You don't want to just like squeeze blindly, but I'm slowly going to come in and just squeeze a little bit. When you do this, I don't know if you can see when I squeeze, the whole braid actually gets just a little bit longer. It actually just unbends these corners, straightens these corner bends just a little bit, and changes the angle that they're going on. But this is the best way that I've figured out to make this braid tight around our stone. So let's do a test fit. Well, there's still just a little bit of room there. Sometimes it takes a little bit of practice to make this consistent. It's actually tight right here, but it's a little bit like, it's a little bit loose right here. So sometimes you might have to go back and just be like, oh, this spot needs just a little bit more squeezing. But all in all, that's not too bad. All right, there's some funny stuff going on up here. Sometimes you can sort this out. Sometimes you can't. Anyway, I'm going to see if I even need that before I spend a bunch of time sorting it out. So again, always decide the orientation. There isn't much difference on this stone, up or down. I mean, I could mount it sideways if I wanted. I really like my oval. I've heard that part of the reason the oval shape is so appealing is because it's the same shape as a person's face. And beyond that, I don't know. But I do find the oval shape is a nice shape. So I'm basically going to hold the bottom of my stone somewhere in the center, I say with a question. Start to bend it up. Can do some adjusting, bend a little more. I think that's going to look good right there. All right, so I'm just squishing, making sure that both edges are ending up over my stone. There we go. That's looking good. I can now hold it here. And that's looking good. 3 guesses what the next bend is. It's going to be taking all this mess and making them point straight up from the top of my stone. So this is kind of a mess. I'm just coming in and squeezing it all together, putting a bend in it, and then shoving it down to the stone. Okay, so that's kind of like I bend a little and then I shove it down to the stone, and then I kind of keep doing that until I'm happy I'm in a good place. I don't know why I always flip this over at this point. It's just a little easier. Now, where to grab here takes a bit of experience and a bit of judgment. Just want to, all right. But I'm going to guess about here. I'm going to bend that and press it down to my stone. Now what happens when I kind of gather these all up together? I got a little bit of funniness happening there, but otherwise it's not too bad. And this side, not too bad. There's just a little bit of like braiding that came undone up here. If you're good with patterns, You can probably come in here and figure out what's going on. If you're not good with patterns, this might be a little trickier for you. Yeah, this one needs to go on top. All right, there we go. Bend that like that, this like this, that one like that. I'm literally just like re-braiding the end of this, which takes a little bit of practice. This side too, I just want this end one to come on the outside. And it's just because I can see the pattern of my braid and what I want it to do. Oops, all right. There we go, that's starting to look a bit better. How does that look now? That's not bad, but I feel like these aren't centered on top of my stone. They're just a little bit that way. So let me show you a real quick trick. If you can catch it right at this point, it's very close. I'm literally just going to squeeze my stone this way a little bit. And that actually looks better to me. That looks centered. You probably didn't even see that move, but you can basically kind of rotate your stone until it's in the right position. So that's looking good to me. I'm going to come in here and squeeze this all tight, both this way and this way. All right. My stone is secure. There's no movement inside of that braid in there. So that's what I want. I'm pretty happy with that. But, of course, it doesn't want to stay like that. On this pendant here, I do something a little bit different. I actually bring in just a little bit. This time I've used 26 gauge. Just a little bit of 26 gauge wire. Oops. Ooh, my cutters are doing funny things. There we go. Okay. This is, I don't know, maybe a 6-inch chunk. I am going to use this very, very thin wire to bind all of this together so that when I go to make my bail, I don't have everything jumping around. So it's usually easiest just to pick one of these shorter wires and just coil around it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. All right. Squish that together. Maybe pull the end a little. All right, there's my coil, which is basically tying a knot in the end of this. I'm going to slide it all the way down. Oh, I see that tail's giving me grief. Slide it all the way down here. You can even get it around that corner if you want. So now I'm going to hold everything tight again. Make sure I'm happy that everything's where I want it to be. There we go. Slide this down as far as it'll go. And use this tail to literally wrap around this. All this whole mess. That's why everything's got to be tight before you get here. Probably 5 or 6 rounds is fine. I'd recommend making them kind of fairly neat. That won't focus, I'm sorry. Kind of fairly neat so that they're not too lumpy, although it's thin enough wire that that's not going to matter too much. And then it doesn't really matter which end you choose, but I'm just going to coil around one of my tails 3 or 4 times. And now I can cut this tail off. And I've got another tail where I started that I can cut off. All right. Push this wrap down just a little bit. Yeah, that's hard on my fingernails, so you can also just use your pliers. All right. Now, because we had 5 strands in our pendant, that means we have 10 ends up here. 10 ends is a lot. It's a lot of ends to finish. You're going to have a ton of decoration to the point where you're going to like not even be able to see your beautiful stone anymore. So that's why I've left kind of 4 longer ones that I'm going to use. And then I've got 6 of these shorter ones. Now, you see all these 3 that are the same length? Because they're the same length, I know that those are the ones I started on top of my jig, and those are all coming from the one side of my pendant. And now these other 3 kind of shorter ones that are all different lengths, they came from the bottom of my braid where I ended, and they're all coming from this side. So I'm going to take a pair of grabbers, These 3 short ones are coming from this side. I'm pulling quite hard, and I'm pulling them off to the side. I'm not pulling them to the front or the back. I'm pulling them off to the side. And as you pull them, you're going to find they're going to line up next to each other. Don't have them crossing, or if they're trying to cross, then uncross them. It's nice if they're kind of bent down next to each other. Now, let's see, that one. I want this one, and this one. Those are the 3 shorter ones over here. So I do want to pull pretty hard on them and bend them down, just like that. So now I've only got 4 wires sticking straight up, and one of them is really long. All right, but first let's get rid of these 6 tail ends. So you do want to get them down as far as you can. Oops. You do have to grab them separately. Now I'm going to get my flush cutters in here, and what I want this to ultimately look like is I want to continue bending this down so it's sitting right next to this neck. So I'm going to cut it right here so that it's not longer than my neck. I'll show you how I'm going to do that in a second. I'm just going to cut the other 2 off there. Let me get these pliers in here. Nice, sharp, bent nose. So I'm just going to grab that end one, and I'm literally going to bend it down and squish it in. Can you see that? It's right here. Now I've got one more in the back. I kind of did the front 2 all together. Just grab that and bend it down. And squish it as tight to my neck as I can. All right, let's cut the other side off. I'm going to do the same thing. Where I'm cutting is judged by the tallness of my neck. Does that make sense? The height of my neck? All right, let's tuck this side in too. There we go. This last one's a bit trickier because I got some coils around it, but I'm just going to do the best I can. I gave it a pretty hard squeeze. Look how tight that all came together. You can see all 3 of them. They're all on the side of my pendant, okay? I didn't bend any of them to the front. I didn't bend any of them to the back. I want the front and the back to be the least lumpy as I can get them, so that's why I bent them all off to the side. All right, so from here, this really extra long one that I've got, I kind of follow it down, and it's coming out of this side, so I'm literally going to bend it that way. Okay, these last 3 are going to be my bail. Now, if you want, you can totally weave these. Oops, I'm sorry. I think I'm not going to. I think I'm just going to do a simple 3-strand bail because that's what I like to do on these guys. But you can mix and match any of these bails with any of these pendants. It's totally up to you. I'm going to do my best so that these don't cross, but I basically need to squeeze them and bend them forward a little bit. Can you see that? Squeeze them and bend them forward, and I'm doing it right on top of this like bulk of wires because that bulk of wires is going to be my neck. This I feel like needs, I just want to straighten that kink out of it so that these are kind of coming up fairly straight and uniform. All right. You might even try pulling that. I just don't like this little bulbous bit right here. That's what I'm trying to get. Oops. Just by squeezing it. There we go. That looks better. Now they're coming up fairly close right next to each other. All right, let's bring in my bail making pliers. Here. All right, bail making pliers. I'm going around the smaller side so it's on top. We've got these sitting next to each other, so they're going to go over that really nicely. There's no like jumping around or twisting or anything. Now, I still always like to just do this squeeze here. There. that looks better. Cool. And I've got one wire left, almost like I planned that. That one is going to be the one I wrap around my neck. There. Sometimes you just gotta tweak as you go so that everything looks nice. Alright, I can fiddle with that a bit more later. I feel like I've changed the size of my bail just a tiny little bit, so let's get this back in here. Oops, there we go. And then I take this top jaw and I kind of go like this, pushing any extra wire down into the tail. Alright, that's about right there. Now, I guess this tail wants to go around the back first, and I'm starting up at the top of my neck. And it's actually coming over top of those shoulders, but now it's got to ride kind of over those shoulders as it works down. Sometimes this is hard to make it even, so do the best you can. It does take practice. There we go. That's not looking too bad. And this is why I like to leave lots, like a nice long wire for this job, because this allows me to go down as far as I want. You kind of got to come down over the front of your stone, up over the shoulder, down over the back of your stone, up over the shoulder, and bring it. And I'm pulling. I've got this part of the wire in my hand, so I'm pulling quite hard as I'm doing this. There we go. That's starting to look like what I want it to look like. Kind of just keep, building this up until you think it's done. That's actually lots. That's actually more than I usually do. Actually, I want to take some of that out. Too much. Change my mind. It just looks funny where it came over this lump here. So probably in here is where I'm going to end it. That looks like a better spot. Alright, so I got one of my wire ends that I've cut off here. I'm going to use this to poke. I'm going to look for a place to tuck my wire end in. That's not a bad spot right there. So if you can see what I'm doing, I stick it in as far as it'll go. I bring my thumb to where it's touching there. And now keeping my thumb in the same spot on the wire, it shows me how much space I've actually got in that spot. I have lots of space in the front here, but and it's not the end of the world to tuck something in the front, but if I can find a spot in the side, that is my personal preference. I think that's going to be my good spot right there. So I'll bring this around to that spot. Double check my measurement. And I'm going to bend it right here, so that's going to tell me where to cut my wire. Like a nice flush cut on there. Alright, so moment of truth. This does take practice. Oops. I'm pulling on it. You can't see that I'm pulling, but I am pulling. I put a sharp bend right in there. Now I kind of have to back it up, get that started in the right hole. Alright. Now you got to bring this around. Is that started in the right hole? I feel like it's kind of started, but it hasn't found the actual hole there, because I've kind of got a bit of a funny bend. This is what makes this tough. Let's straighten this. Can you see that? I've got a funny bend in the bottom here. So let's straighten this little tail out again. Now let's try that again, hopefully without bending it the wrong way again. Bend this around this way a little bit. That'll help. And that just slid right up into place, so I know there's enough space in there. Alright. Well, not my neatest job, but that's alright. I do want to stick my bail making pliers back in here because I haven't tied these bail wires down yet. So I can still, you know, if I've messed up my bail, I can still come in and fix it. Make sure it's looking good. My neck's tucked in right here. I'm happy with that. I am ready to cut my bail wires, cut these tails, do my spirals, and sew them on, which is just like in some of my other tutorials. This one here, I've actually done something different. This is much harder to do. Because you're actually coiling the same gauge of wire around, the same gauge of wire, this is really hard to do without mangling your braid. I recommend not starting with this, but maybe later on you can try it. Otherwise though, I mean, it's just a matter of however you want to do it. This is a pretty amateur thing to do where I've made my spirals. Sorry, I want it to focus on here. Where I've made my spirals and I've literally like tucked them underneath of my braid. This like is adequate, but I wouldn't recommend that. That's just one other way of doing it. It's just a little lumpier, but it's actually not too bad. Theoretically, these loops here could catch and pull out. That's up to you how you want to do that. So real quick, just to show you this one more time. I don't know, maybe I'll go in. I'll make a heart this time. I need a bit more length then. And I don't know, I'm kind of making this up as I go. And I need some round nose pliers. Here we go. Alright, I'm gonna go in this time. I usually go out, but see what happens here. There we go. Something like that. I think I'm going to change my mind and cut this one shorter. Which you can do. It's just harder to make them long again once you cut them. Alright. Bring it out. Something like this. Alright. I need a bit more space in here. Alright, they're going to come together nicely like that. What am I going to do with this middle guy? I think I need to cut him off too. And I'm just going to make a third spiral inside here. Always starting with my P-loop. I really do like my P-loop. Once your P-loop is closed, which I can see this one isn't quite. There we go. If your P-loop is kind of off to the side, you can always get underneath of it and squish it flat to get that end just in line and flush with your wire. Make everything flat. All right, let's see how this lays when I get in here and fuss about a little. That's not bad. I just need a little bit more curling around to make these sit next to each other flat. All right. Sometimes you just gotta fuss. Cool. So when you go to sew, you always want to start here and work towards the end of your wire. So let's get my 26 gauge out again. And you usually only need about 5 or 6 inches to sew with, but I'm going to grab a slightly longer piece this time. And I'm going to start with this guy over here. Bring it underneath and do my 3 coils. Oops, hang on. 1. There we go. 2. There we go. 3. I make this look easy. It's not. So, let me get some focus here. There we go. Okay, and then I slide this down to, let's see, I think right there is where it's going to touch. So I'm going to keep sewing. Just tightening my coil still. There we go. And again, you got to go around a second time to make your first loop. Hopefully this is a bit of review. All right. And there's my one stitch. And there's my second stitch. And let me, you know what, my third stitch only needs to go around here. It's a little bit of experience that's taught me that this is going to come over for the third time to make my third stitch. I do want to just snug this up as much as I can. There we go. And now I can coil 3 more times just around here. There we go. 1. 2. I'm kind of using my fingernail to make just the right curve right here that can fit around there. That is not easy to do. Now, that's enough to hold. I've got my coils on this side and this side, but I'm not going to cut this long tail off yet. I might find that I want to bring it around and attach these two together with it. I can, however, cut this tail that I started with out. So I just want to pull it once, make sure that everything's snug and tight, get the point of my flush cutters right in there. And then I still always just like to make sure that every time I cut a wire off, I don't have any sharp spots. So at the very least, run your finger over it. I'm going to grab one more piece of my 26 gauge wire. And I'm going to come around this way. And again, I'm starting up here. You know what? I think I'm going to start by coiling around. No, I'm not. I'm going to start here. I'm going to coil around just this one. This is subjective. You know, there's some designing that happens even in this sewing at the end, because you can see all of your stitches. It does take a little bit of practice to make your stitches really nice, but they kind of end up working as part of your design. So spend a bit of time getting these right. Once you know how to get them right, it gets easier and quicker. So let me just slide this down, and I'm going to sew around this guy here. Make sure my tail isn't in the way. Got a lot of little wires poking out. That's okay. This still needs to slide down a little bit. There we go. Well, that's looking good. One more time to get my first stitch. And there, and one more time for my last stitch. I'm sorry, these close-ups my camera has trouble with. All right, so I do want to get rid of this tail here. I'm going to pull it and cut it, making sure that the flush side of my flush cutters are getting in there. I don't think I'm going to get in there with those, but I cut it short enough that I can't feel that. Okay, so this one, wow, that's way out of focus. There we go. This guy here, he's not actually touching anything, so I am going to just get in here and literally uncurl it a little bit so that it is touching. That looks better to me. Out of my two tails, this one is my longer one. So rather than adding another piece of wire, I'm just going to continue to sew with this one. This is a little tougher. I need to get my nail underneath of that spiral, and then I can pull this around. Just to be matchy-matchy, I am going to do 3 more coils before I go on, because that's what I've got on the other side, and even though it's not like exactly the same, that's going to help with balance. And this is just easier to sew under rather than bring around. So there's my 3 coils, just to balance it with this side. Now, I think I'm gonna, I like to call this walking down my wire, where I'm gonna continue to spiral around it. Can I get that underneath? There we go. But I'm not gonna coil tightly. You see how it's kind of covering some distance on my wire? I'm gonna just do that for probably 3 stitches, because you know how I am with my odd numbers. Oops. Something like that. One more. I find it does help to like spin my pendant as I do this, to work it around there. All right, so that's my 3rd one. Now I'm coming up here, and I'm going to start to sew these 2 tails together. So I'm going to go across here, oops, under there, underneath both of those tails, pulling it tight. And now I'm going to do that again. Guess how many times? I like my 3s. There's my 2nd one. There's my 3rd one. Now, despite liking 3s, sometimes you just have to fill a space, and I feel like I just need a couple more wraps here. So I'm going to just keep going. So underneath of there and underneath of there, pulling that tight. And again, let's see how 5 looks. 5 is still an odd number. And there and there. Yeah, that looks better. That looks like it fills the space a little more. Now the last thing I have to do is sew this one, because this shorty little guy, he's not attached to anything. He can still get caught and pulled away from our stone. So I'm going to come across one more time, so I'm on this side. Oops, get underneath of there. And now I'm literally just going to sew these 2 together, going around my last 2 ends. This is why you always start at the where it's coming out here and work towards your ends, because if I did this backwards, this would take longer because it's not an open weave. Now I'm noticing that, can you see that? It's not super focused. This wire has jumped on top of this one. So I'm literally just going to come in and kind of push it off to the side, because I do want them sitting flat next to each other. I don't really want any of those jumping on top of the other one. Oops, as soon as I pull that, it wants to do that. So you just gotta make it do what you want. And there's my 2nd one. I do want to get a 3rd one in there. I'm hoping that it'll just pop into that corner. There, I could literally hear the pop. Squish these together. I've got just a tiny little bit of space right here. That's where I'm going to do my coiling. You always want to finish with a coil around one single wire. And the thinner the wire, the more effective the hold that your coil is going to give you. 2, I think I can get one more in there. There we go. 3. All right, pull that nice and tight. Get it up. Get my cutters in here. There we go. And now this one, I did already coil it, so I can cut that tail off. I ended up not needing it at all, but sometimes you never know. It's good to have a contingency plan. So I cut 2 wire ends off. Let me just make sure. The other one was over here. Make sure that I don't have any scratchy bits. Couple things, I can see this tail is kind of poking up, so I'm going to push it against my stone. And I think that's it. I'm happy with that. So, thank you for joining me. We now have a secure lapis lazuli pendant. The only other thing I sometimes do is just widen these out just a little, but that's optional. You don't have to do that at all. I hope you enjoyed that class today. There's lots to learn in here. I've got just another video that's going to show you some other ways to use this braid because it's a really nice braid. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.